Alright guys, EGM coming at you with a brand new video, and today I'm bringing you my 2017 season preview for the Philadelphia Eagles. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Last year, the Philadelphia Eagles finished with a record of 7-9, fourth in the NFC East. They didn't make the playoffs, but it was a pretty interesting season. In last year's NFL draft, the Philadelphia Eagles selected Carson Wentz second overall. Bradford was the starting quarterback. Now, I believe a week or so before the NFL season started, they actually traded Sam Bradford to the Minnesota Vikings, making Carson Wentz the starter. Carson Wentz had a decent year. Now, the Philadelphia Eagles started the season 3-0, including a dominating win over the Pittsburgh Steelers in which they beat them 34-3. Now, after their 3-0 start, the Eagles lost 9 of their remaining 13 games and missed the playoffs. They also finished with a division record of 2-4. So it indeed was a disappointing season for Eagles fans. But on the bright side, there were some flashes that Carson Wentz could be a really good quarterback in this league. Carson Wentz threw for 3,782 yards, 16 touchdowns, did throw quite a bit of interceptions. He threw 14, but he shows that he has a really good arm. He's pretty accurate with the football. But I think a lot of the mistakes that Carson Wentz made had to do with a lack of weapons. Jordan Matthews was his number one option, and we all know that Jordan Matthews isn't the best number one option that a quarterback can ask for. He has a tendency to drop balls, but he was their leading receiver. He racked up 804 receiving yards with 3 touchdowns, and one of Carson Wentz's more efficient options was Zach Ertz. He caught 78 catches for 816 yards with 4 touchdowns, proved to be a very reliable option. And their run game was actually pretty solid. I believe they were ranked 11th in the league in terms of rush yards. Ryan Matthews led their team in rushing with over 600 yards. Darren Sproles chipped in with about 400, and Wendell Smallwood chipped in with about 350 yards. So they were getting production from a variety of different backs. Now, going into this season, the backfield does look a little bit different. Ryan Matthews is still on the roster, but he's on the verge of being cut. Darren Sproles is still there. They still have Wendell Smallwood. They drafted Donnell Pumphrey, who they hope can contribute right away. And they also signed veteran running back LeGarrette in free agency, who last year had over 1,000 yards and 18 touchdowns. So the Eagles front office is doing everything they can to improve this running game and give Carson Wentz a little bit of help. Now, I talked about their lack of weapons at the receiving position. With this offseason, they go and sign one of the best receivers out there, Alshon Jeffery, which really gives Carson Wentz a liable target, especially down the field. He's a big physical receiver that can go up and grab balls thrown his way. They also signed Torrey Smith in free agency, who, although last year didn't really have a great season, only amassed 200 yards, but he does give that Philadelphia Eagles receiving corps some experience after young guys like Nelson Agholor haven't really developed into who the Eagles expected them to become. And these two signings were going to give Jordan Matthews a better fit into this Eagles offense as a second option. I think Jordan Matthews is a decent receiver overall, but as a number 2 option, you can't go wrong. But just recently, they traded Jordan Matthews to the Buffalo Bills for Ronald Darby. So speaking about Ronald Darby, let's talk about this Eagles defense. Last year, this Eagles defense was ranked 13th in terms of total yardage, 20th against the pass, and 18th against the rush. They were ranked inside the top 10 in terms of interceptions, and ranked 16th when it came to sacking the quarterback. They have a pretty solid linebacking core that includes Nigel Bradham, Jordan Hicks, Michael Kendricks. They have a really good defensive line, led by 2 studs in Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham. They also have a really good defensive front. I mean, they lost guys like Benny Logan and Connor Barwin, but in free agency, they go out there and they sign defensive end Timmy Jernigan, bring in a veteran in Chris Long, and with their pick in the first round, they selected defensive end Derek Barnett out of Tennessee, who amassed over 30 sacks throughout his career at Tennessee. And they still have 2 studs at the defensive end position in Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham, 2 guys that can really wreak havoc and get after the quarterback. So although some key losses they suffered during free agency, I do think that this defensive line did improve. Now, the safety positions are set with Malcolm Jenkins, who had 3 interceptions this past season, and Rodney McLeod. But the issue I have with this team, or this defense rather, is with the cornerbacks. Now, as I mentioned earlier, they traded Jordan Matthews for Ronald Darby, who is a heck of a pickup at the cornerback position. Really does improve one of the spots. They lost Nolan Carroll in free agency and Leotis McKelvin, who aren't really great cornerbacks, but nevertheless, they were 2 starters. But they used their 2nd and 3rd round picks to draft cornerbacks. In the 2nd round, they drafted Sidney Jones, who was a 1st round talent, but got injured, I believe in the combine, or I believe it was his pro day at Washington. But he's out indefinitely with an Achilles injury. Now, the hope is that he'll return by October, but the Eagles have said that they're not going to rush into anything. They believe he's a special talent. Now, they did take a sort of a Dallas Cowboys approach in the way they drafted Jalen Smith, who was injured at the time of the draft and did miss his rookie season. But the Cowboys believed in his talent and believed that once he came back from injury, that he would be a special player, and the Eagles believe the same thing with Sidney Jones. And I do really like that pick. I do believe that if Sidney Jones does come back healthy, he's going to be a very good player. But just as a security blanket, they drafted Raziel Douglas in the 3rd round out of West Virginia, who's a big corner, very physical. And because of the lack of depth at these positions, there's going to be opportunities for Raziel Douglas to be able to earn meaningful minutes early on and become an impact player. The Eagles did sign Patrick Robinson. As I mentioned, they traded for Ronald Darby. They still have Jalen Mills. But even with those acquisitions, the cornerback position is not that deep. So once Sidney Jones returns, and throughout the season for Raziel Douglas, these 2 young corners are going to have every opportunity to climb up the depth chart. Now here's some of the things that I'm going to be looking for in this upcoming season. First of all, the Eagles need to get after the quarterback. They have solid depth at the defensive line position with Timmy Jernigan, Vinny Curry, Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham, Chris Long, 1st round pick Derek Barnett. So this gives Philly a solid line that can open up edge opportunities for the outside linebackers Nigel Bradham and Michael Kendricks. And in this NFC East, you have to have a pass rush with the quarterbacks you're going up against. You're going up against Kirk Cousins, Eli Manning, and Dak Prescott. Another thing I'm going to have my eye on in terms of the Philadelphia Eagles roster is the wide receiver position. We talked about how they signed Alshon Jeffery, great number 1 option for Carson Wentz, but who's number 2? Who's going to be the 2nd option? Jordan Matthews is out after they traded him. They brought in a veteran in Torrey Smith. Nelson Aguilar is still on the roster, who's been pretty underwhelming throughout his young career. So they need one of those guys to step up and be a threat alongside Alshon Jeffery. Give Carson Wentz another option. Zach Ertz is going to be there. Zach Ertz is going to be reliable. But they need someone on the outside that's going to be able to make plays. So I want to see who's going to step up. Now, last but not least, I have my eye on the running back position. Now, last year, Ryan Matthews was the Eagles' leading rusher. Now, he's on the verge of being cut. He suffered another injury. It looks like he's going to be cut sooner rather than later. Now, as I mentioned earlier, last season, the Eagles did have production from different running backs. A variety of different running backs chipped in. Wendell Smallwood, Ryan Matthews, and Darren Sproles. But who's going to step up and be a consistent number 1 back? Is it going to be the rookie Donnell Pumphrey? Is it going to be Wendell Smallwood? Is it going to be LeGarrette Blount? No matter who it is, they need to be consistent. The Eagles have a really good offensive line, highlighted by Jason Kelsey, Jason Peters, and Lane Johnson. So they have a really good offensive line. They're going to be able to open up holes, but they need a running back that is going to complement this passing offense. So now that we talked a little bit about the roster going into the season, let's talk about the schedule. Now, I do think the Eagles have a team that can be very competitive, but I just don't think they're going to be able to make the playoffs this season. I think there's too many teams with better rosters in them, with better players in them, and that are going to have better seasons because they do have a pretty difficult schedule. They have the 10th hardest schedule in the league. Now, I do see them winning only 7 games this season. Yes, repeating the same record that they had last year, going 7-9. But let's go a little more in depth. So I think they lose to the Redskins, they lose to the Chiefs, they lose to the Giants, start the season off 0-3. I think they beat the Chargers, they beat the Cardinals. I do think they beat the Carolina Panthers, and then they beat Washington, and then they beat San Francisco. So I do think that after they start the season off, they'll go on a 5-game win streak. Then they'll lose to Denver. They'll head into the bye week. They'll come back. They'll lose to Dallas. They'll beat Chicago. They'll lose to Seattle. They'll beat Los Angeles. They'll lose to New York, lose to Oakland, and then beat the Dallas Cowboys and finish the season with a 7-9 record. Alright, that's it for this video, guys. If you enjoyed, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure to comment down below and stay tuned for more content.